Hi everyone, my name is Choma. In this discussion, I'll be sharing how RFPs are structured, what they are really asking from evaluators, and how we should think about responding to them. For this discussion, we're giving three RFPs. I focus on Bridge Evaluation RFP and the Empowering Quality Women RFP. I chose them because they both deal with social impact, but in very different contexts. One focus on child outcome and the other on political participation and gender. When I looked at both RFPs, I realized they were all asking the same core questions. What exactly would you evaluate? How would you evaluate it? And why should we trust you to do it? This reflects what we learned from this week's reading about evaluation proposals being built around purpose, questions, and methods, not just data collection. Both RFPs follow a similar structure. They include sections like scope of document, qualification, and selection criteria. So once you understand one RFP, it becomes easier to understand others. Where they really differ is in what they expect from the evaluator. The Bridge RFP focuses more on outcome and impact, asking questions like what is working and why. The Creative Women RFP focuses more on whether the program achieved its objective and what can be learned. This also affects how proposals should be written. The Bridge RFP expects deeper analysis of outcomes, while the Creative Women RFP expect a more structured evaluation approach and clear recommendation. So proposals cannot be generic, they must be tailored to the RFP. The key insight for me is that even though RFP looks similar, they require different types of thinking. Understanding the RFP properly determines how the evaluation should be designed. For the rest of this discussion, I will focus on the bridge RFP because it clearly defines outcome focused evaluation question. The first key area is the scope of work, which is labeled as scope of service or scope of work. This section defines the evaluation problem and includes questions like what is working and why. The session is critical because it defines the direction of the evaluation. If it's misunderstood, the evaluation can focus on the wrong things like measuring participation instead of outcome. This connects to what we learned from this week's reading about focusing evaluation through clearly defined questions and purpose rather than just collecting data. In my proposal, I will break this down into clear evaluation questions, for example, which activities are linked to outcome and where the participants disengage. Then I will match each question to a method like interviews or data analysis. I will also be very specific about what data I'm collecting, from who and when, not just saying I'll collect data, but clearly explaining how and why. The second area is the qualification, labeled as minimum requirement. This section focuses on whether the evaluator has the experience to actually deliver the work. This is important because evaluation involves real people and real decisions. So organization wants proof of experience, not just claims. In my proposal, I will include specific examples of evaluation work I have done, what I've worked on, the data I used, and what results were achieved. I would avoid general statement and focus on concrete details. For example, explaining exactly what role I played and what outcomes came from the evaluation. The third area is the response review and selection criteria. This session explains how proposal will be evaluated, including quality, capacity, and cost. For me, this session acts like a guide. It shows what the organization values, where I should focus my right when writing my proposal. It also connects to what this week's reading said about planning evaluation properly as a way of making sure the approach is realistic in terms of time, resources, and feasibility. So I'll structure my proposal to match this criteria: clear plan, realistic timeline, and a budget that is directly linked to activities. I would also break the work into clear steps like data collection, analysis, and reporting. This makes my proposal more realistic and easier to evaluate. Another important thing is the ethical side. Since this RFP involves family and children, there are risks around sensitive data and power imbalance. So evaluation must handle that carefully and respectfully. Based on my own self assessment, I feel confident working on stakeholder engagement because I've experienced working with different groups and managing expectation. However, I struggle more with methodology, and I've realized that sometimes collecting data without clearly defining your evaluation question first can be a problem, and that's something I really need to improve. Before I conclude, these were the readings that informed my decision, and I really want to thank you for listening. I would love to hear your thoughts. Which sessions do you think is hardest to respond to and why?